I was spooning cinnamon into a mixing bowl when the alert hit my phone. Federal record update, clearance modified. At first I thought it was just another glitch in FedLink. It happens every December when the system tries to auto-roll, but the timestamp was wrong. And the change wasn't mine. When I logged in, the override had been submitted under Garrett Langley's assistant's ID. Cute. Probably figured I wouldn't notice during the holiday slowdown. The kicker? My name was gone. Just gone. No notice, no memo, just a quiet erasure like I'd never existed in the compliance chain of a $500 million contract. And if you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, please do. 97% of people who hear these stories never hit the button, and honestly, it helps the team more than you think. A like or comment keeps these real stories coming and keeps folks like Garrett on their toes. Anyway, Garrett hadn't responded to my email, not even a "we're looking into it." That told me everything. He didn't just know, he planned it. The funny thing is, Garrett was the type who thought reading federal continuity binders was beneath him. He liked decks, sizzle reels, rebrands. The fact that I still filed cross-referenced logs in triplicate probably made his skin itch. Too bad those logs saved the entire contract 4 years ago when our primary onboarding module failed during a DOE penetration audit. That's when the board gave my LLC permanent designation as Registered Contract Officer, with a continuity clause built in. No removal without dual signature from the board and federal liaison. Not just internal reshuffles. And sure as hell not, because some new VP wanted to install his favorite Harvard buddy with a fresh MBA and zero clearance. The clause was buried in the 2021 ratification memo, page 87, footnote 6. But if you understood it, if you understood how layered federal procurement was, you'd know that once the clause activated, everything stopped. The system doesn't ask who wanted you gone. It asks who had the authority to do it. And Garrett? He had none. So I did what I always do. I documented. I pulled the action log, time-stamped the change, exported the authorization trail. Then I sent one calm email with the subject line: Federal Continuity Clause Breach. Immediate review required. I see Quasid Legal. I BCC'd the DOE Program Liaison, and I attached the signed appointment letter from 2021. No emojis, no bold text. Just 62 words that froze a $500 million contract in its tracks. And then I went back to baking, because I knew what came next. Garrett's email came in like a paper cut dipped in vinegar. No subject line, just a 4-sentence blurt, no greeting, no sign-off. Your clearance isn't active. You've been removed from the workflow. Stay out of federal projects moving forward. This is final. Like I was some intern he could toss out of a budget meeting. There was no HR protocol, no formal offboarding, nothing from legal, just his email. Like that was all it took to undo 3 federal signatures and a board vote. I reread it twice, not out of disbelief, but to double-check how recklessly he'd worded it. He was cocky, sloppy, the kind of guy who thinks a glossy title makes him immune to rules carved into federal compliance stone. Garrett assumed this was some dusty legacy clause I'd forgotten, that I'd been riding out a nice federal retainer and would go quietly if he barked loud enough. What he didn't know, because he never read past a slide deck, was that the continuity clause wasn't just board approved. It had teeth. It was crafted in response to a 2020 security incident that almost voided our entire Department of Energy contract. That clause locked Hudson LLC in as the registered contract officer through January 31st each year, unless a formal dual override was processed through the FedLink system, with both federal and board countersignatures logged and time-stamped. You couldn't just click a drop-down and replace me with Chad from sales. I didn't rant, didn't call, didn't try to educate him on federal regulation like some compliance martyr. I simply replied, 16 words. That role can't be vacated by VP memo. Please check Section 9B of the Federal Continuity Binder. That's it. No escalation, no fight. Just a subtle reminder that there's a difference between confidence and jurisdiction. Then I BCC'd the federal program manager and attached the ratified letter that named my LLC Hudson as RCO, bearing 3 signatures, including one from the agency liaison who still sends me holiday cards. That one email contained everything Garrett needed to realize he'd just tried to unhook a live wire with his bare hands. I logged out, took a sip of coffee, and went back to reviewing the renewal triggers for the Q1 onboarding slate. because I had no intention of missing a single handoff just because someone didn't understand how authority works. 5 minutes later, my access was still active. He hadn't even blocked the right user ID. That's when I knew. Garrett had made this personal, but I don't get loud. I get surgical. Let him think he just wiped me off the map. The audit logs would tell a different story. The subject line was almost charming in its simplicity. Kill access. No context. No timestamp reference. Just a marching order from Garrett to legal like he was ordering a damn sandwich. He'd forwarded my 16-word email, probably thinking he was being decisive, assertive, a take-charge leader, or whatever nonsense he sold in his performance reviews. But instead of yanking my credentials, that email triggered a protocol he clearly didn't even know existed. 15 minutes after it landed in legal's inbox, the reply chain hit the CEO. The entire exchange was only 2 emails deep before the CEO responded with one line. He just vacated a federally locked appointment. And just like that, everything shifted. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I opened my terminal, archived Garrett's email thread, pulled the action log, stamped every event, and uploaded the compiled packet into our federal continuity archive. Then I logged into the contract portal, toggled the override lock, and activated Clause 9B. It took exactly 9 seconds. But the impact? It was like flipping the master breaker on a skyscraper. The clause had one job: suspend all contract side authorization the moment a registered officer was removed without formal override. No warning, no appeals process. It wasn't built to be forgiving. It was built to protect federal interest from internal stupidity. And Garrett had just stubbed his toe on it at full sprint. I toggled the RCO authentication logs to manual confirm only. From that second forward, any attempt to modify, approve, or export anything inside the $529 million DOE framework required my biometric signature or a notarized dual countersigned federal override, which, spoiler alert, didn't exist. The dashboard status bar turned red. 2 minutes later, audit logs began to flag every system touch with the same cold phrase: cleared by Hudson LLC. Federal override required. I didn't send a single update. I let the silence speak. No team-wide announcement, no flurry of Slack messages, just a growing trail of locked forms and blocked access as every attempt to push compliance, renew licenses, or onboard vendors hit the same immovable wall. Me, or rather, the legal echo of me. Hudson LLC, still fully active, still fully registered. That's the thing Garrett never got. I don't need a title to hold control. I just need a clause. So I poured another cup of coffee, sat back, and opened the logs again, watching the slow, inevitable realization begin to creep across their faces. They hadn't just tried to push me out. They'd tripped the wire I buried to protect the whole damn operation. And now they were locked inside their own mess, with no map, no override, and one very silent woman holding the keys. January 2nd rolled in like a slow-motion car crash. Holiday glitter still stuck to the office hallway carpets. Most folks were coasting in with travel mugs and sugar hangovers, expecting a standard kickoff. But within minutes, the mood shifted. Federal modules didn't load. The onboarding queue for subcontractors threw up red flags. Contract compliance dockets? Blank. Locked. Access denied. No one panicked at first. There was this awkward optimism in the room, like maybe the servers just needed a restart. Garrett stood at the front of the main conference room, talking about new vision and agile reinvention, while half the team quietly refreshed their dashboards over and over. Nothing. By the time the 11 a.m. sync began, legal was already poking around the back-end logs. Garrett blamed tech delays, said IT was addressing a bug. Funny, since IT had already reached out to me an hour earlier, asking if I could temporarily lift the restrictions, not requesting access. Not asking what was going on, just assuming I still had my hand on the wheel, which I didn't. The clause did. I ignored the email. I wasn't their emergency wrench, not anymore. They'd voided the agreement. What happened next was just the natural consequence of bad decisions made by people who thought they could outrun regulations with a strong jawline and a LinkedIn promo video. By day 2, things got louder. Subcontractor logins bounced. Compliance workflows returned nothing but error codes. Garrett started snapping at people in the hallway, demanding updates and dragging folks into urgent recalibrations. But the truth was obvious. You don't get to pull a federal linchpin and expect the engine to keep humming. On the third day, I tuned into one of the public project dashboards, out of habit and curiosity. Most of the names I knew, junior staff still clinging to Garrett's PR tone like it was policy, but one screen caught my eye, a live stream from the integration hub, a sync call between teams. No one noticed I was in the viewer list, until a junior analyst, Erica, I think, leaned into her mic during a lull and said it, almost like a ghost story. Why does the contract dashboard now say RCO Hudson LLC active? The call went dead quiet. No one had an answer, because none of them had read the clause. The smart ones didn't speak. The cocky ones threw out wild guesses, cached data, unresolved ticketing sync, delayed badge resets. But all of them knew something was off. You could hear it in the way their voices changed. That realization that someone upstream had messed with a live power line and now everything was smoking. Garrett still hadn't figured it out. He thought this was an outage, but this was the clause doing what it was built to do, enforce continuity through silence. No alarms, no flashing lights, just control shifting back into the hands of the one person they thought they could erase. And I was watching the whole thing unfold, not as a threat, just as a fact they could no longer ignore. January 9th landed like a loaded gavel. Audit day, the one date circled in red ink across every whiteboard in the compliance wing. People wore their best business casual trauma. A few even wore suits. Garrett showed up in his usual smug uniform, too tight blazer, fake humility, and a smartwatch he kept tapping like he was more important than time itself. The DHS contracts agent arrived at 7:42 a.m. sharp. Clipboard, tablet, government badge on his jacket pocket. He didn't smile, didn't shake hands, just nodded once like he'd already read every word ever written in the building and was just here to verify the slow collapse of someone's career. They started with the walkthrough, procurement logs, vendor integration trails, compliance handoffs. Garrett kept trying to lead, talking over department heads, throwing out acronyms like they were poker chips. But the agent didn't react, just checked things off and moved forward with that federal silence that says, I already know what's wrong. I'm just collecting how wrong. Then came the pivot. Midway through a session on access logs, he paused, tapped something on his tablet, looked up slowly. Who authorized the RCO change before the continuity window expired? You could feel the oxygen leave the room. A dozen heads turned like synchronized swimmers toward Garrett, who blinked like he didn't understand the question. Then, smirking, because of course he did, he said, I did. He was no longer active. That detail alone told me everything. Garrett didn't just override the appointment. He didn't even know who he'd removed. He thought Hudson LLC was some old compliance contractor, probably assumed it was a man, probably didn't read a single line of the ratified agreement. The agent didn't respond, didn't flinch. He reached into his folder, pulled out a single-page printout, and handed it directly to our corporate lawyer. One highlighted line, he said. The lawyer took it, scanned the section, stopped halfway through. His jaw tightened. Shoulders went stiff. He didn't speak right away, just stood there blinking like he was trying to unread what was in front of him. Then he whispered, too low for Garrett to hear, but I caught it on the audit room mic. Please tell me you didn't. Garrett's smirk cracked. The document was clear. 41. CFR for 5-105. It outlined the protocol for the removal of federal oversight personnel, specifically RCOs embedded via continuity clauses. Dual confirmation required. Federal liaison plus board. Minimum 60-day escrow buffer. No internal substitutions. No interim handovers. No exceptions. Garrett hadn't just skipped a step. He'd committed a regulatory violation, one that froze federal activity, one that flagged audit trails and paused disbursements, one that could invalidate the entire 529 nanometers framework on paper alone. The agent turned to him again, voice even, unimpressed. We'll need to confirm all access logs since the attempted override and a signed affidavit from the original RCO. That was the moment Garrett realized what had happened. He hadn't removed me. He'd activated me. And now he was standing in a room full of federal eyes with nothing but a cracked smile and a fake title to shield him. No one spoke. Because what do you say when the clause you ignored just walked into the room with a badge and a clipboard? It came down at 3:14 p.m. A terse all-caps agency alert flagged with priority red, temporary freeze initiated, all contract systems linked to framework. DOE 529 suspended. Pending RCO role clarification. No ceremony, no dramatic meeting, just one quiet email that hit every exec's inbox and detonated the illusion of control in real time. Garrett saw it during a cross-department alignment huddle and went pale. Mid-sentence, mid-brag, mid-fake laugh about modernizing compliance workflows. He stopped talking, just stared at his phone like someone had hacked his reflection. He bolted out of the room and called legal before the door even swung shut. His voice carried through the hallway, something about how this was obviously a misunderstanding, how nobody mentioned a clause, and how we needed to get ahead of this with a formal reinstatement letter. He even tried to summon HR into it, like that department hadn't already been quietly folding under its own broken process charts. But the reply from legal was cold, precise, and delivered straight through the company's Slack channel, where it landed like a guillotine. We can't reinstate him. He wasn't terminated. He was replaced illegally. His role reverts by law. That was the moment it turned from awkward to irreversible. The COO, Diane, turned from her seat during the emergency debrief and asked him, level as a surgeon scrubbing in, "Did you ever read the continuity binder?" Silence. Because of course he hadn't. He'd skimmed the summary memo, cherry-picked a few phrases that looked good in a PowerPoint, then tossed the rest aside like it was just dusty bureaucracy. Garrett had always confused authority with capability, never understood that true power wasn't loud. It was buried on page 94 of a federal annex that could ruin you with one untriggered clause. Meanwhile, I was in my kitchen, apron on, dough rising. The house smelled like rosemary and garlic. The audit timestamp pinged on my dashboard like a bell tower. I leaned over to check, not because I was worried, but because I knew the timing meant the system had officially flipped. That clause? It wasn't just a failsafe. It was a hand grenade with a velvet pin. You had to know how to remove it safely. Garrett hadn't removed anything. He yanked. And now the agency had locked every system tied to the $529 million contract. Procurement froze. Billing logs iced. All onboarding activities for Q1 were dead in the water. Vendor payments stalled mid-disbursement. System credentials suspended under clause enforcement protocols. All because a man who thought he was smarter than procedure didn't realize the woman who wrote it had already moved on and left the clause behind as both shield and sword. I didn't text anyone, didn't call. I just watched the dough rise and poured myself a glass of wine. Because control doesn't look like shouting in a boardroom. It looks like knowing exactly when silence becomes law. They spent 4 days clawing through the wreckage like archaeologists who'd just discovered a trap door under the foundation. Legal pulled every board resolution, every ratified memo, every whisper of a procedural backdoor they thought might save them, and all they found was concrete. The clause was flawless. 3 federal liaisons had signed off on it in 2021. The board ratified it unanimously. Even the agency's internal continuity officer had annotated it with a note that read, "Meets or exceeds federal protection standards for RCO role retention." There was no ambiguity, no room to reinterpret. The clause didn't just hold the door shut, it sealed the building behind reinforced steel. They couldn't undo it with apologies, couldn't roll it back with a memo. The clause had been built for one purpose, to keep a fool like Garrett from gutting oversight during a branding spree, and the damage wasn't limited to titles. Garrett's assistant was gone by Tuesday, walked out quietly after IT flagged the unauthorized FedLink credential used to trigger the initial override. I doubt she knew what she was doing. I doubt Garrett told her. She probably thought she was pushing a standard role update. Instead, she became the digital fingerprint that started the chain reaction. The temporary RCO Garrett tried to slot in a guy from vendor relations who once asked me if a 1099 was like a tax emoji, had access to nothing. No portal keys, no clearance paths. The system simply grayed out every form he touched. Every time he tried to approve a vendor, the message blinked. Action requires clearance from Hudson LLC. And Garrett? He spent most of those 4 days holed up in meetings with legal and ops, trying to spin the whole mess into a systemic miscommunication. He even tried floating the idea that the clause was too aggressive for modern compliance standards, as if that mattered to the agency whose framework had just been frozen over it. But the best part? There was one file, just one, that could have prevented the entire disaster. It was titled Continuity Transfer Requires Fed ID plus Board Resolution. It had sat untouched in Garrett's inbox for 2 weeks, unread, unforwarded, never opened. The system even showed the hover preview timestamp. He'd scrolled past it 9 times. Probably didn't like the file name. Probably assumed it was some old contract language someone else would handle. And so the clause stayed put. Not because I fought for it, not because I made speeches, but because a man who thought he was too smart to read footnotes was too proud to open the one file that could have saved him. I never had to show up. I didn't re-enter the building. I didn't lift a finger, because the clause held. And they finally realized what it had been holding back. The call came just after sunset, a number I hadn't saved but recognized anyway. CEOs don't usually dial directly unless something's cracked. And Garrett clearly wasn't fit to make the ask himself. His voice was tired, almost hoarse, the kind of tone that comes from 4 days of pretending nothing's on fire while standing knee-deep in smoke. We'd like to restore your role, officially, retainer, cleanup authority, just until the systems are stabilized. I let the silence hang a second longer than polite, not to be cruel, just to remind him I could. The clause functioned exactly as it was meant to, I said. My obligations ended the moment your VP breached continuity. He tried to keep the conversation alive. There's no one else with the full framework knowledge. This isn't about Garrett anymore. We need resolution. I'd already prepared for this. Not out of ego, but out of pattern. Men like him don't read until the contract bites back, and then suddenly every burned bridge looks like a rescue ladder. I won't step back in, I said calmly, but I'll refer you. And I did. I pointed them toward Marcy Tran, a certified federal contracts specialist I trained over the past 2 years. Sharp, methodical, and more patient than I ever was with executive nonsense. I'd brought her into Hudson LLC knowing this day might come. A clean handoff, notarized, pre-cleared for backup representation under dual key control. Hudson LLC remained RCO on paper. But now, every action required 2 signatures, mine and the board's. Quarterly reviews, external counsel present. Nothing could move forward without clearance from a firm that no longer answered to anyone inside the building. They'd tried to erase me. Instead, they institutionalized me. And Garrett? His fresh start vision died somewhere between the freeze notice and the 4th vendor deferral. The new compliance infrastructure he promised never launched. The modernization team disbanded quietly. The flashy portal updates he once pitched with animated slides, scrapped. The system stayed locked under legacy mode, untouched, unchanged, fully intact. No one said it out loud, but they all knew. The safest hands had already left the room, and now they had to run everything through the ghost I left behind. Weeks passed. The chaos dulled into procedure. Audit closures came through in carefully worded emails. The agency lifted the freeze, but only after the board signed off on a reinforced continuity plan that made the old one look like a napkin sketch. Contract systems came back online in stages. No more automatic rollovers, no more click-to-approve workflows. Every credential now required dual key validation. The handshakes had become signatures. The trust had become notarized policy. The new login banners said it all. No frills. Just cold, institutional memory burned into digital stone. Registered Contract Officer, Hudson LLC, via Board A Federal Joint Approval. Clearance valid through John 31, 2026. No internal override without federal countersignature. That last line hit differently. Not because it flexed authority, but because it proved the clause had done what it was built to do, survive people. At a procurement panel weeks later, streamed for compliance officers and vendors alike, the CEO sat stiffly under the lights and referred to the ordeal with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He called it an eye-opener on the value of knowing your clauses. Said it like he came to that conclusion on his own. Garrett wasn't there. His name never came up. Neither did mine. That's how you know the clause won. I watched the live stream from my home office, coffee in hand, logs quiet, no new alerts, just the hum of a system that now required 2 layers of clearance before it could even think about moving. Marcy handled everything with calm precision, never overstepped, never tried to dramatize it, just followed the protocol I left her and let the silence speak. And me? I didn't go back. Never needed to. My name was never printed in the press release. I wasn't invited to the restoration luncheon. No one handed me a plaque. Because real custodianship doesn't need applause. It just needs structure. Control isn't about titles, it's about signatures, especially the ones you don't see until they're enforced.